It's been over 2 weeks since Bungie released its latest major multiplayer shooter, Marathon. We here at Final Weapon have had the opportunity to sink our teeth into the game, thanks to Bungie and Sony, since its launch. Today, we're here to discuss our overall thoughts and impressions of the game so far. I'm joined by Luis and Dante to really dive into what we enjoyed about this game, what we're not so sure about, and what we're looking forward to in its future. So, starting off, I wanted to ask you both, what has been your experience with Bungie as a company and the previous Marathon games in the past?
Well, for the most part, I've been aware of Bungie for the longest time, largely through Halo and Destiny and Destiny 2. I put in a lot of hours in Destiny 2, so I wasn't too familiar with the original Marathon games. I did try Marathon 1 once, but the cult following within Marathon as a whole, as a franchise of the original Bungie from the 90s, was very interesting to return to when it was announced back in 2023. But I wasn't too aware at the time about extraction shooters. Largely, extraction shooters were not as popular or in the know until stuff like Tarkov, Hunt Showdown, and Call of Duty's Warzone mode DMZ. For the most part, there's also Dark and Darker, but it's more free to play oriented. Of course, there's been others that have come out, but Marathon just feels unique in a lot of ways, and it is very exciting to get my hands on it and just sinking so many hours and so many runs and just dying constantly in order to complete a contract for the most part.
Yeah, I've been aware of Bungie obviously through Halo and everything like that, but when the initial announcement came out that they were going to be returning back to the world of Marathon, it was quite surprising just because it was a game that I was aware of and obviously knew about the following it had. I had tried it out, and I can see why people would like it. It is very, very dense, especially in terms of lore and just character building with the different AIs that you can talk to in the original. But it never really, I guess, struck with me in the same way that something like Doom would in terms of old school shooters. But hearing Bungie return back to it, especially with the technology that they have now, and especially the such striking art direction that they have, it was very, very exciting to see what it would become, especially from that reveal trailer, and just how absolutely gorgeous the art design is. But ever since then, I was looking forward to it and always keeping my eye on it to see what it was. Hearing that it was an extraction shooter was definitely interesting. I wasn't sure what it was initially going to be, but it was an interesting thing to hear just on terms of what they could do with that sort of a genre in terms of the background of the original Marathon and sort of rebooting it for now. But I think after playing it, it's definitely turned out a lot better than I thought it would be. What did you think about the experience, Saras?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as both of you in that I was a Bungie fan kind of since I was a kid. Halo was, I think, the first major video game franchise I fell in love with. However, I never really clicked with Destiny in the same way that I did with Halo. Something about it just didn't draw me in as much as Halo did and other shooters at the time. So, while I was aware of Marathon as sort of this game that was tangentially related to Halo, like there's a bunch of references to Marathon in the Halo games, such as the Marathon symbol, and of course, other elements here and there, like weapons. I didn't really know much about it, so when the announcement came out, I really wanted to dive deep into the lore, and it always seems so interesting, and how it's very dark sci-fi in a very different way than Halo is, where there are just as much, spaceships and colony advancement as there are eldritch horrors and terrifying creatures beyond our imagination, which that was my thing. Yeah, that is easily my interest in fiction and just in general. I was also not really sold on the extraction shooter concept. I've never really been a fan of extraction shooters. There's only a few that I've played, and most of them I was not really fond of. So going into Marathon, there was a lot I was very skeptical about. But similar to the both of you, I am, pretty pleasantly surprised at how well this game has turned out. And I've really enjoyed it so far. And, before we do a deep dive into everything that makes this game what it is and what we like and what we dislike about it, I want to talk a little bit about the style of Marathon, because people looking to pick up Marathon always talk about its visual style. Obviously inspired by kind of Love, Death, and Robots and very different elements of sci-fi and cyberpunk fiction. So I was curious to see what did you both think of the style of Marathon, from the first trailer to the gameplay reveals to the cinematic trailers? What really drew you in about the style, and even just the gameplay, what they showed of it, and made you think, this is a game that I think I'm going to really enjoy?
Well, for the most part, the aesthetic of Miego is very much in full force. This is very much his style of super realistic. There's also like the stuff from Joseph Cross, since he was the senior art designer of the project. He also has worked on Dune with the Freeman suits, and the overall aesthetic of how clean some of it looks, because a lot of the aesthetic is very much corporate clean and just forward facing from a lot of these companies that sponsored the expedition of Project Marathon, and the presentation of that being completely isolated and abandoned in each of the zones is very harrowing, because you get into one of the zones, either it's Perimeter or Dire Marsh, you see all these sponsored like containers being identified and just completely covered in moss or dangerous flowers or tick nests, and it's just a lot of visual realism. It was described back in 2023 as graphical realism, and it's just completely unique. And that's also down to the shells, each one looking completely different from the other and just completely identifiable at the same time, even when they have their own custom skin. It's just honestly beautiful, even like at low graphics options on PC.
Yeah, I mean, the words that they used to describe Joseph Cross, as you said, used to describe the art style for Marathon is they coined it as something being called graphic realism, which I feel is a very, very good way to describe it, in the sense of it's not graphic in the sense that it is a very, very pretty and realistic and beautiful looking game, but it is a world that is entirely predicated on just brand graphics, and that plays in super, super well into the whole aspect of the different factions that you can be a part of, how they are all in some form organizations or corporations that you're working for, and all of them have such distinct but very, very striking brand images that you can just see plastered everywhere. And in reality, we're reaching a point in time where everything is becoming much, much more corporatized, and we can start to see that sort of corporatization and brand images show up everywhere in our day-to-day life, just being plastered on every possible surface that it can be. And this feels like the most extreme way of it, where we're getting guns that are sponsored by nutrition companies and stuff like that, and it all just feels like there's a very dark aspect to it, like as you were saying before, like a dark realism to it. But man, if the future looks this nice, I'm not going to complain too much about the art design, I'll say that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with both of you that it's something about that style. You know, there's a lot of different influences for it, a lot of things that you can kind of compare it to. That sort of corporate idea. I almost, when I first saw the shells, it reminded me a lot of almost like a crash test dummy. And there was something so fascinating about that image that immediately drew me in because, as we'll discuss, these characters are all completely expendable, right? They're not human. They're barely even machines. There's no consciousness. They are, as they are described, shells. Um, so you are not some superhero or some elite soldier. You're just, um, you're a nobody. Having to survive and take what you can get and see if you can make it to the next day or to the next payday. Um, and there's a lot fascinating about that aesthetic that feels very different from other sci-fi stories, even other cyberpunk stories. And it's easy to see why so many people wanted to pick up this game from just the looks in the cinematic trailers and the gameplay trailers alone, even before we get to the gameplay. But obviously, this is not just a game that is all style and no substance. There's a lot more once you actually boot up the game for yourself on whatever console or platform you choose. So let's do a really deep dive. Let's go deeper into what this game actually is. And to start with, I want to discuss the narrative of Marathon. There's been a lot of people talking about, oh, this game would be so much better if there was a single player. But there is still a story at the heart of it, and it is in many ways a continuation of the original trilogy. So I want to ask you both what you think of the opening cutscenes, the little snippets of story we get in the codex, and beyond that, what we think of also the factions, and also your favorite faction.
Yeah, well, for the most part, the story is very much as it was in the original game. Like, you weren't given a story, you had to figure it out yourself by finding terminals throughout the UESC marathon. And that tells you stuff either about the colonists, about Strauss, or just recollections from our dear friend Durandal. And that being translated in a modern sense is very well captured in the opening credits of Marathon. You get this really detailed intro about how the expedition started in 2400s, and just like how the UESC Marathon just sought out a new colony because Earth was being overpopulated. Of course, it disappeared for about 300 years or so, and when it came back, obviously there was a relay from the caretaker AI Leela, which got broadcasted forward alongside another message from Durandal. And this is just summarizing the opening cinematic before our consciousness got sent into a runner for the tutorial stage, and how the mechanics work. Finding each codec either by completing contracts or by exfilling with lore items that are scattered throughout the zones is very cool, because some have audio logs with them, and you can hear this sometimes the amusement, the despair, the seriousness of the situation, or you're just getting talked to by the UESC AI Orion, telling you, why are you here? I already warned you. Because after you finish your first few contracts, Orion will literally intercept your UI and will literally warn you to stay away, because we are trespassing in this world, and in a lot of ways each faction wants something out of it. Of course, some want more specific things than others, but I'll get to that in a bit. But companies like Nucaloric, their AI correspondent Gaius is very much concerned of what really happened down there, and he just wants you to figure it out. And you get to hear another AI on the colony, Dari, who is voiced by Neil Newborn, go to rampancy throughout each entry. And it also gets to the point where, like, some of the factions do want something out of it, or they want something out of you using a runner shell. But yeah, for the most part, my favorite faction outside of New Caloric is, of course, Arachne. Maybe skin them alive, but yeah, overall, Arachne just wants you to kill people. And he talks to you directly. Charter, their correspondent, talks to you every time you rank up Arachne. And it's very diegetic. While I do want to see like more of a direct line of priority contracts from Arachne, I do like the delivery of how diegetic it is, because you just naturally kill people in the process. You kill other runners to stop them in their tracks and just keep giving to the pro-corpse fascists. So is said by Gantry, of course. But yeah, overall, people do lament the fact that they would like to see a single player, but I feel like it's delivered just fine as is. On top of the fact that people complained during the process of the ARG to unlock Cryo Archive that a lot of smaller tidbits and story stuff were just isolated outside the game. But at the same time, this is also going to be found in the game itself as well.
Yeah, there is a lot to the narrative of Marathon, and there's just so much in terms of the world building around it, just with what happened after the original expedition of the Marathon, how these, mega corporations have a stake in that original expedition, or they're just looking to seek new wealth in the signal that has come back, and the expedition that's been sent out now to retrieve valuables from Tau Ceti. But honestly, I think that the way that they tell the narrative and the little bits and pieces of information that you get, I honestly think is perfectly fine, especially for a multiplayer game. Because while getting another single player Marathon game would have been crazy, it would have been so cool, the intention wasn't for that. It was to create a multiplayer extraction shooter. And Bungie being such a company that is focused on telling stories, that's something that they can't just ignore, especially when creating a multiplayer shooter. So the way that they go about it, especially with the little logs that you can get after you complete contracts, and you can go through the codex and see the different explanations of all the things that you come across there, or conversations between the different AIs and people who are in charge of things on the Marathon itself, are super neat, and they serve to scratch that itch for the people who are still looking for that Bungie storytelling. Whereas people who just want to play the game, they don't really care too much about story. They just want to unwind after a long day at work, and they just want to get a couple of runs in, see if they can get some better loot. They don't have to focus on it. They can just plow through it. They can accept their rewards from the codex, and they can just go from there. So not to say that the Bungie's kind of having their cake and eating it too, but I think that the way that they went about with explaining the story and everything was really nice, and it adds for a lot of intrigue in the future, because there's so much possibility, and they're leaving it open for all of this mystery, especially with the ARGs that Gambit was talking about. And that outside of the game interaction that's there is something that hasn't really been explored, especially in terms of the actions of these outside game ARGs having influence of things that happen in the game, especially recently with Cryo Archive, is a super cool concept. It's super neat. Granted, the execution could have been a little better. There was a couple of puzzles, from what I've heard, that were very complicated, but having that sort of community aspect of it and working together to unlock something in the game, I think is super neat. In terms of my favorite faction, oh gosh, I think I'm gonna be a little bit boring, and I'm gonna agree and say that New Caloric is up there just because they seem like they're the most moral in terms of what they want to do with Tau Ceti and everything. So I'd say New Caloric is probably my favorite. Cyber Acme is also up there just because they generally seem very neutral and they just want to more so explore the Tau Ceti and sort of just get the information down for archiving sake, for learning sake. And Sekaguchi's also up there as well, just because they're so curious, they're so interesting, and there's a lot of intrigue and mystery behind them. And I am very interested in a faction who has a giant moth worm creature as their liaison to you. But yeah, what was your favorite faction, Saras?
Oh man, I mean, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the world and narrative of Marathon. I was definitely in the camp where when they first announced that this was a multiplayer only extraction shooter, a lot of my excitement kind of faded away. Because I was really hoping for this to be a proper single player game with multiplayer as a side. But after really playing it for myself and playing the server slam and playing the game for 2 weeks now, I think I understand what they were trying to do. Those who are familiar with the original Marathon trilogy will know that it is very labyrinthian. There is a lot of mazes, there's a lot of very strange approaches to not just the level design but the story. There are some very odd terminals you can find and read through that say strange things that don't really have an answer or a distinct conclusion that you can take away from it. And here, it's the same thing. You are fighting both players and, NPCs as you try and unravel the story and push it forward. And you are traversing these areas, whether it's the initial 3 section zones, which are Perimeter, Dire Marsh, and Outpost, or Cryo Archive, which we'll dive deeper into later, and how that really came into being. It brings that maze-like aesthetic back. And to be honest, again, as much as there is a part of me that wishes there is a more traditional single-player campaign with cutscenes and dialogue and all those sorts of things, I think this was the best way they could have adapted the original Marathon for a modern audience in a way that is fun to play with friends and fun to just do by yourself, to such an extent that I don't think this game would have clicked as much with people if it was just a single player game. I think the extraction shooter element added a lot of extra, for lack of a better term, sauce to the overall experience. And I loved it. I've loved reading all of the terminals, the codec entries, and seeing what it all unravels. Some of them are really, really dark, kind of instilled the same feelings that the original BioShock games put in me, of how dire and depressing they all are. And yeah, in terms of the factions, there are 6 factions. We've got Cyber Acme, New Caloric, Sekaguchi, Traxxas, Arachne, and Maida. All of them are very interesting in their own ways, and being able to see their story continue and cutscenes as their representative talks to you, or in the case of Traxxas, talks down to you, every time you complete a priority contract for them is exciting. That was actually, to be honest, the faction elements was what drew me to the game in the first place. I saw just randomly while I was scrolling, I was interested in Marathon, but I didn't think it was a game that I wanted to pick up until I saw a faction intro snippet for Maida, which had this very pumping synth beat as guards or rebels flooded the streets against the UESC, and I thought that was so compelling. It reminded me a lot of, a Star Wars Andor kind of setup, which you will never hear me saying is a bad thing. And I guess in that respect, Mida is probably my favorite. They've become a little bit of a meme with how you're having to do some very juvenile tasks for them, like spray painting a wall or, all these other things. But I've always been fascinated by the rebel faction in a world that is dominated by corporate greed and, liars and duplicitous intentions. So Maeda being someone who tells you right out the gate, oh, you can't, we're not your friend, but we're gonna really stick it to the UESC. Do you want to help? We are fire, are you fuel? Which is such a cool line. Bungie's writing has always been provocative, but this feels on a different level. But, we've talked a lot about the narrative, we've talked a lot about the aesthetic. Let's talk about what you're really picking up Marathon for, which is the gameplay. To start, I want to ask you both, what do you like about the gameplay so far? What have you really enjoyed in your few dozen, potentially even up to 100 hours of gameplay? What has really stuck out to you, and what have you enjoyed so far in your playtime?
Well, funny that you mention it. I currently am sitting at over 100 hours of playtime.
Oh my gosh.
I played nonstop. It has consumed my life. But, for the most part, the shooting is... I would say this is the best shooting Bungie has put out in a long while. Destiny has always felt right to me. Like, it always felt tight. It always felt good. And, honestly, transitioning that to Marathon, it feels amazing. For the most part, each gun feels uniquely different from each other. Like, you have standard ballistic weapons, you have standard energy weapons, and you also have precision weapons. Of course, each one has different ammo types that you can carry, because ammo is limited. Ammo resources are very limited when you run, because it is the tension of the gameplay itself, of the extraction shooter gameplay, where resources are very limited, like a survival horror game. And for the most part, each weapon brings about the best parts of each other, and some bring out the worst of each other, depending on who you ask, of course. Because I am personally not a fan of the hardline. I like the repeater. You could ask someone else, they would like the hardline over the repeater. And the list goes on. Of course, there are some weapons that do feel a bit overpowered than others, like, for instance, the Western shotgun, being a sawed-off 2-hit shotgun that can literally instantly put down a gray shield or a green shield, depending on how close the range is sometimes. And genuinely, it puts you in a bit of dread every time you're, like, on low ammo. You have to, like, scatter around, see if there's any containers that have, like, any extra ammunition, or just drop a gun and pick another one up from either a UESC drone or another runner's box. But for the most part, I really, really love the BR-33 volley, because it's literally just the Halo 2 battle rifle, and you can customize it to make it look like the battle rifle. And there are also some attachments along the way and enhancements that you can do in your weapon that amplifies the feel of it, either the ammunition, or make them turn into Halo guns as well. Like, for instance, the V22, if you have a special pinnacle attachment, it will turn it into the Needler, and every shot will explode on contact. So it's really good that these weapons are, like, very much inspired by their predecessors, and they're just well referenced in this game. Of course, if you lose it, you lose it, but that's the nature of the game, and that's the nature of how you have to beat yourself up and get the gear fear out of you in order to keep running, because you will be gaining some really good stuff, and you will be putting it on the line each run, and you will never get it back sometimes. But you know what? That's fine. There was always going to be more, and there's always going to be something different to pick up and play.
Marathon is a part of it has the same sort of intrinsic quality that I think something like Destiny had, in that first and foremost, Bungie knows how to make good feeling combat, good feeling weapons. The act of just like shooting a gun, the thing you're going to be doing 90% of the time you're playing the game, is so satisfying and just feels so good when you get into those combat encounters, that you're going to want to seek out combat, it feels like, in order to just, shoot people. And it's so fun that it really helps with the feeling that I got, which was that as I was playing, I was constantly going and trying to find excuses and reasons to just keep playing the game, to go, I can do one more round. Oh, I can't end on a loss. Like, I got to throw back into it. We go again. And it's so nice that, it's still there, especially with the focus on PvP that this game has. Everything else about sort of the combat and the items that you have feels very strategic, in terms of the different items that you can use, stuff like cardio kick or OS debug, the attachments that you can put on the weapons, the different mods that they have on, like Gambit said, there were weapons that you could turn into what feels like the Halo Needler, and one of the other ones that I really liked, I ended up using was there's one that whenever you end up taking out an enemy, it makes a explosion happen that affects everybody else. That's super just adds on to the chaos of getting into combat with other groups, and everything feels like it has purpose, in that when you're setting up a run and you're going through your vault to try and set up what you think is the perfect setup for the contracts that you have to do, or just going to go resupply and get more weapons, it really does feel like you have to sit and think about what you're bringing in and what feels best for the right type of scenario. And that also goes into the different shells that you can use. Each one of them have their own hero-like abilities that really excel in certain scenarios. I know that especially in solo runs, I've been using the assassin a lot, just for its capability of being able to cloak itself and hide, which really makes popping out and surprising people so much fun, and probably very frustrating from their perspective. But it's a very fun thing. When you're playing trios, though, there's a very good synergy that you can have between the different shells and who you want to choose. And depending on the combination of the shells that you have inside of your group, it can help things, it can hurt things, but at the end of the day, it does feel like if you do have the skill and you do have the coordination and know-how, you can get through any situation. But what did you think about playing through the game, Saras, and the weapons and shells and all that?
Oh man, I mean, so similar to the narrative, it took me a little bit to really adapt to Marathon and understand what kind of experience it was trying to do. So for full disclosure, all three of us played together. We did a lot of multiplayer rounds where it was just us doing trios. Luis and I, we did a few duos here and there, and a lot of times I played by myself. And I really enjoyed playing trios and duos, but I don't think the game really clicked with me until I played solo. Because solo is a very different, tense experience. Luis, you mentioned it earlier of how there's a lot of like almost survival horror elements in the way you have to manage your ammo and your resources. And I felt that a lot in solo. Solo, I had to just completely stay quiet and take a very calm and careful approach to each encounter and each little mini area in every zone. And it was some of the most thrilling experiences I've ever had in a video game ever. Not even just multiplayer, just ever. Because there would be moments where this is the first time I think I've ever played a game that's made me want to plug in headphones. Because I know a lot of people play these kind of multiplayer shooters with headphones on. And usually I don't. I don't play Splatoon or Halo or any of those games. I just kind of play them with whatever speakers I have on. And whether it was because of just how low quality my TV is, or because I wanted to hear the audio around me more, I plugged in headphones and it completely changed my experience. Some of my favorite runs and moments in the entire game were when I was, looting an area in such as North Relay and Perimeter, and just kind of glancing around, picking up items, and I just hear footsteps. And I have to immediately find a hiding spot and see if I can wait. There were other moments similar to that where I would be running across a field and I would hear my footsteps, but I thought I heard something else. So there would be a moment where I would stop walking and I heard the footsteps continue and I immediately panicked. And those were the moments where I really locked in and understood what this game was. And those are my favorite parts. I loved managing all the weapons. The sponsored kits are a lifesaver. There'll be times where I will run in with a sponsored kit, lose everything, and go right back in, almost like I'm playing a roguelite. Or I'll win big, I'll get a huge prize, and I won't have any space in the vault, so I'll have to take in some other items and trade it out with the more valuable ones, so I'm losing something and still able to fill the vault with my most valuable stuff. But when I go back in, there's a bigger risk and sometimes a bigger reward, or sometimes I lose everything. And it took me a while to really get used to the idea of treating it more like a roguelite rather than a battle royal, where each death is a lesson and each death is you just have to go right back in and do it again, which was so cool and so thrilling. And I loved it. I loved everything I had played and all those little moments and those little encounters where I am managing my own resources in my own area and really emphasizing, as very pro players call it, game sense, which, I guess it is game sense in this case. But yeah, I loved it. And before we go into a little deeper mechanics of, the shells and the different zones, we have to talk about what we didn't like about the game. We, as we've made it very clear so far, we really enjoy Marathon. This is a very fun multiplayer game, and if you're considering picking it up, I highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of previous Bungie games or anything like that. And we'll talk more about that, of our final thoughts. But before we get to that, we have to discuss what we didn't like. So, starting with you, Luis, what were some problems of the game that you wish they changed, or maybe are so baked in deep into the game's core that can't be changed?
Well, there's plenty to identify. Obviously, there's still some instability issues on PC, largely when there's a lot of particle effects and foliage going around. Very present in the Outpost map. When it's raining and the heat cascade also pops up around the same time, the frames literally go low. And I will literally identify the stuttering right away, which can make the runs on Outpost a little more difficult. There's like a lot of lack of optimization in some areas on PC, because this game is very CPU heavy. And for the most part, that is kind of my major complaint, is the instability. There are also times when sounds don't play as well. And the major complaint I would have is largely within the map that just released, the biggest map that everyone was waiting for, Cryo Archive. And this complaint is largely shared amongst everyone, and that's the fact that the one thing that everyone wants to do is fight the compiler is very much locked away through RNG. And that is a major complaint. Of course, there's other complaints that people are having about the game itself in general, but, a lot of it is wishy-washy, and people start to learn how to love this thing right when it's about to get removed. Like how the sound was completely removed and made things harder for navigation, which just got reverted back in Tuesday. But yeah, those are my major complaints about Marathon as a whole that I hope they could get solved. And especially on PC, since there's a large PC population, on top of having a very large console population as well.
The extent of the things that I didn't like were mostly just small little snags that I had throughout playing that, like, while it wasn't anything very, very big, it does build up to be something that you can't really ignore. Just to go off what Gambit was talking about in terms of performance, generally the game did perform well, but 100% when I was playing Outpost, there were points when rain and the oh gosh, you just said it, the
heat cascade.
Fire.
Heat cascade?
Yeah, the heat cascade had coincided with itself, and the frames dropped super, super hard, which does kind of suck, especially for a PvP game that is trying to be as competitive as this is. Having a generally good, stable frame rate is something that's well, and you can turn down everything, but it feels like you're doing such a disservice, especially with a game that looks this good. The extent of the other two things that I would have to say are my main issues were getting used to just the menus in the game itself. There's a lot of different buttons in there. There's a lot of different things. And when you first boot up the game, it kind of throws you right into it with a tutorial teaching you how everything works, what buttons do what, where to click if you need help with other things, this and that and this and that. That can get very, very overwhelming. With time, you do get used to where placement of things are. Some of them are in kind of obtuse places, but you do get used to it. But they could have done a way better job just streamlining things, making things a lot easier to read. And the second thing that I had was mostly when doing contracts. There is the box in the upper right corner that tells you what exactly your task is when you're doing contracts and where you need to go. You can follow that, and kind of gives you a vague area of where you need to go to, where it'll say, you need to go to southeastern compound or something like that in order to pick up an item. You'll follow that and you can go there, and a lot of it is just kind of sitting around, walking around silently, trying to find out where exactly to go, because some of the things that the game tells you are very, very vague in terms of your directions on how to complete contracts. And there were a couple of times in which I combed an entire sort of area of one of the hot zones for a contract, and it felt like wherever I went, no matter how many areas I went to, it just wasn't clear on what I had to do. Particularly, there was one on Outpost where the task I had to do was you had to scan your shell, and it says to go on to I think it was like southeastern of this one building. And I was running around this entire time, and I was going, okay, where the heck do you have to go? Because usually when you get close enough to an objective, there's a little thing that shows up on your HUD, like showing you exactly where you need to go and what you need to do. Super, super handy when it shows up. But for this one, it just wouldn't show up, and I had no idea what I was doing, to the point where I ran out the timer in one of my things because I was just so confused. I had to end up Googling it to find out where I needed to go. And lo and behold, for some reason, the HUD pop-up just wasn't showing up until I was legitimately like right in front of it, and then it finally showed up and went, oh yeah, this is where you're supposed to go. So that can be a little frustrating just in terms of how vague the objectives can be. And also I had a couple of issues with certain things in the game just not spawning correctly for objectives. There was another one where you had to spawn in UESC dropship, and you had to upload a virus to it. And I tried to do this mission 3 separate times, because each of the times you go in and you summon this dropship, it comes down, and for the first 2 times it just came down and there was just nothing. It didn't say anything. I walked up to it, I tried climbing on top of it to see if there was anything I could do, and I wasn't getting any button prompt for anything. It was just floating in the air, and it stays there for 2 minutes, and after the 2 minutes it flies up, and then you fail your contract. So I was getting kind of frustrated with that until randomly on the 3rd time I tried it, I went up to it, and finally a button prompt showed up to upload this virus. And so with that, I searched it up afterwards, and it turns out that a lot of people have been saying that the dropship is actually bugged, and that it doesn't properly come down, or it comes down damaged, and you can't do this mission, and it just kind of works on a whim. So there's small little kinks with the small little bugs and glitches that are in there, and if they get in the way of performing the main objective of your game, completing the contracts and everything, it can get frustrating, and it can get really annoying where you have to keep doing the same mission over and over and over again, wasting time that you could be exploring new places or doing other contracts to try and finish this one. But like I said earlier, overall, good game. I enjoyed it, but those small little things kind of build up to be greater than the sum of its parts. Did you ever have anything like that happen to you, Saras?
Yeah, sometimes. I kind of almost categorize my issues into technical problems, actual problems, and concerns, so to speak. I did have a few technical problems here and there. Not as many as you guys. I was playing on PlayStation 5, and for the most part, everything ran pretty smoothly in terms of frame rate, visual quality, everything here and there. There were a few times where there would be some kind of rubber banding almost, where it felt like my character was, held back when I did an action, or kind of jolted around, like a lag sort of, which was always weird. Thankfully, it didn't get me into any actual trouble, like I never died because of it, but it was still kind of noticeable. In terms of actual problems, I completely agree with you, Dante, that some of the contracts and even some of the codex tasks are a bit much and are really, really obtuse. Even just today, I was trying to do a contract where I had to get weapons or explosives for Traxxas and Western maintenance on Dire Marsh. And I was looking all around Western of the maintenance building, like where everything could be, and I couldn't find anything. I still walked away from that with pretty good loot, even if I didn't do my task. But at some point I had to look it up, and I found out that Western maintenance is actually outside of the building entirely and further down in a separate tower, which I don't know how it was supposed to know that. I'm glad that there's not waypoints. I'm glad that as soon as you spawn in, there isn't a go here to finish your task. I'd like to be able to explore, especially in some of the specific ones where you're having to collect certain items. I think that's really cool and fun and a really interesting challenge. But yeah, certain contracts are very, very odd and really hard to do. Same to a lesser extent with the codex stuff of, the one that's been bothering me is there's the mastery challenges, and then there's one that is for thief, where you have to use the pickpocket drone to pickpocket a down runner and specifically pick up their self-revive, which is so specific and so rare, and I still haven't been able to do it. And I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it, other than just by sheer luck. So I don't know if I want that fix. It's just something that bothered me. And in terms of, my concerns going forward, obviously there's a lot to think about when it comes to the game's future, which we'll, also get into. But my current biggest worry is the rate of new content. For the first few weeks, we've had a pretty good burst of new cosmetics and new things here and there. Of course, the addition of Cryo Archive and other such stuff, and the ranked mode and duos mode. But I fear that once we're past that first month, I don't want to have to wait until the mid-season to get new cosmetics. And my hope is that when the store does recycle, because it does change out, we do get new costumes or cosmetics in the store every week plus or so, which great, but I'm hoping that these cosmetics are really good because I want to support this game, and I'll be pretty disappointed if, you know, I'm only stuck with the same few cosmetics for a thief, and every time there's a new one, it's just kind of a like a color swap, which would be very disappointing. But yeah, I'm still really enjoying it. I've still had a lot of fun with everything that I've played so far, and there is so much to enjoy with this game. And what part of its identity comes from the shells and the zones. So let's talk about both. Let's talk about the launch runners and shells. So we have 7 runners: Destroyer, Vandal, Assassin, Thief, Recon, and Triage, and of course Rook. And 3 main zones that are available from day 1, which are Perimeter, Dire Marsh, and Outpost. So what do you both think of what we've gotten so far? What's your favorite shell, and what is your favorite zone?
Well, for the most part, I play a lot of Assassin. I will say that when it originally was like the original gameplay reveal before the re-reveal later in the year of 2025, I wasn't too enthused about their original names, which are still in the codec, by the way. Assassin being referred to as Void, Vandal being referred to as Glitch. It made it very hero shooter. So when they changed the entire narrative of being runner shells, that made it a lot more appetizing in a lot of ways, because I also play a lot of Triage. Triage is a very much a really good situational shell who deals damage but also can deal health and bring back people in an instant with their prime ability, alongside the fact that like I play a lot of Assassin just like Dante solo because the world is dangerous and I would rather like hide around, stealth and stuff like that, and in times catch up on a runner and steal their loot by getting behind them and stabbing them. But largely I have tried the other runner shells. Destroyer is a really good tank when it comes to mobility and being a presence. Like, you have to take out the Destroyer because of Search and Destroy, which if you deal 3 hits, it launches missiles that can deal machine damage, which requires a mechanics kit in order to repair, alongside the fact that Vandal is a very like movement based shell that requires you to use your heat meter, because her prime ability being amplified can reset it and you could still move, alongside the fact that Recon is very situational when it comes to the pings and very communicative. I commend a lot of people playing Recon because Recon is not my favorite shell. Their kit is very situational and requires a lot of time to prepare, and overall like the passives are much stronger than the abilities of the shell. But I also do like to do a good Rook run and take some stuff as well. Because as you upgrade your faction's ranks and unlocks some stuff, it upgrades the Rook's capabilities into having more stuff. Like, if you upgrade Maida's capstone, the Rook gets claymores. If you upgrade Sekiguchi, they get cores. If you get Nukal, they get better healing stuff. If you level up Rook up to level 4 on the capstone of Arachne, they get a shotgun. So it's also free loot at the same time, but there's a lot of risks when it comes to finding a Rook in the zones, which there are 3 to choose from. Those being Perimeter, Dire Marsh, and Outpost. Of course, we've seen a lot of Dire Marsh throughout all the original advertising and marketing as it was the only available zone of the alpha, perimeter is a very good, welcome area that features a lot of verticality and large areas that could be firefights, but also closed quarters areas. The largest being Dire Marsh, which has a lot of empty space that will leave you vulnerable if you're not careful. If you're not paying attention, you're not hearing the amazing sound design as well, you will be blindsided by a sniper or two, or three. Outpost was unlocked the day after launch, and Outpost is very close quarters, but features a lot of good high tier loot that you can find by doing the pinwheel based puzzle, which requires you to go all the areas in order to get access to the command wing, which features the best loot possible. But if you're just content with having blue tier stuff, that's completely fine. But for the most part, Outpost is very dangerous because it has the most density of UESC on top of other players because of how small the map is in design. But yeah, I will say that I really do like Assassin and Triage, and I also like Rooks. I used to befriend Rooks, but I'm no longer a friend of Rooks.
Yeah, you can never trust those Rooks, can ya? I when I was going through the just the initial building up of getting to the later maps, it really did feel very nice to have sort of a slow building of just the different gameplay sort of features to look out for inside the maps itself, stuff like ticks or those horrible toxin plants that are out there that do so much damage to you. But they show up in kind of smaller amounts in the first maps. Then they kind of get larger and larger, and they get more bountiful as it goes on, as you get more knowledgeable on how to go about the outside world on Tau Ceti. And that was just a part of going through the game that I thought was very, very nice, especially for people that might not be familiar with sort of extraction shooters and stuff like that might be trying this game out, picking it up because they think it looks neat or they're fans of Bungie, and sort of showing you how that sort of a genre works, whereas putting it into the actual sort of act of playing through the maps itself. Overall, all the different outposts and the points of interest that they have on each of the maps are designed very, very well. They do feel, I think you were saying earlier, Saras, that they do feel kind of labyrinthian. And there's a lot of different just nooks and crannies that you can find that may have some of the better loot that you can find throughout the game. You know, you could be walking around and then all of a sudden you find a lot box that you would need a key to unlock that you can get some very good weapons from, or you might have scanned something earlier and next thing you know you come across a locked room that you so happen to have the key for, and you can take advantage of the things that you have in there. And just the general claustrophobicness of being inside of a building and the fear that it generates, not only when there are other people around, when you can hear those sort of soft footsteps of someone who might not know that you're there, but the sort of, it feels overbearing hums and these hard metal footsteps of UESC soldiers that are walking around, and it really does make you feel like you're cornered on all sides. And that sort of tenseness and the adrenaline that it pulls into when you manage to go through a big group of them without notifying any of them, or you manage to fight through them all, is super, super satisfying. And that goes into the just the map design that they're able to do, the level design. But that also has to do with the different shells that you have, and each one of them, like what Gamble was saying earlier, some of them do feel a little bit more situational than others. I do agree that Recon, after trying it out, it does sound like a shell that you would want to have on your team in terms of just being able to give visual on where enemies could possibly be, but in practice it is not as easy as you'd think. It does require a lot of setup. It does require a lot of situations in which you can utilize the abilities of recon. But generally, the other shells that you have do have purposes, and they do have general sort of utility that you can use that can be useful in any sort of scenario. You can always take advantage of the capabilities that a thief has in terms of finding out loot, or the ability to push using their shield that a destroyer has in fights. So it's really just going through and seeing what you like the most and sort of building it up and really getting used to it and practicing, and then you can really come on your own onto a team once you get, you know, a couple of your friends and you have your roles locked down. You really all come together, and it does feel like you are a part of a squad trying to go through and get as much loot as you can. In terms of just what my favorite shell is, definitely still Assassin for solo runs. That will be uncontested. It is just too useful, and it is too fun. I feel bad whenever I do a solo run and I see another person who doesn't have Assassin, because it's like, oh man, you just don't know. But in terms of playing squads and stuff like that, definitely Destroyer would be my favorite, just because I am a very aggressive player and I like to push. So having that shield and being able to just push up and not have a fear of getting shot or anything, and really sort of divert the attention of the enemies so that your teammates can flank and get the upper hand on them, is such a fun thing. You get to be such a thorn in people's sides. But yeah, I think Saras, you really liked playing as Thief, didn't you, right?
Oh man, yeah, Thief is probably my favorite, just kind of to really jump right into it. Luis, you mentioned it earlier, of this idea of the hero shooter aspect to it, and that was something I was going in, I was really worried about, because I do like hero shooters, but they sometimes get exhausting, and there's a lot of times where there will be a character that looks cool, but their playstyle doesn't really click with me, or a character who has a great playstyle, but their design isn't really, interesting to me. And kind of going back to what I was saying about the aesthetic of, like, every single shell in this game looks fantastic and is immaculately designed. Destroyer obviously, harkens back to the Mjolnir Recon soldier from the original games, and Vandal has this very, like, punk aesthetic, and they're all great. But yeah, my thing was, even though I have tried, I think, pretty much all of the shells, I wanted to really stick with one. I wanted to treat this like, even though there are situations where perhaps a destroyer or a triage would be better, I wanted to sort of try and see if I could solve those problems with just the shell that I had chosen to devote to, which was Thief. Treating it almost like an RPG. And 9 times out of 10, that led to some of the most fun gameplay scenarios. For example, like we were talking about Recon earlier, I tried Recon, I just couldn't wrap my head around her kit. So I went back to Thief, and there were times where I was using Thief like Recon. Her pickpocket drone can steal loot from people, but it could also just work as a great surveillance tool. Same with her little visor that scans loot nearby. If you're looking at a box in the distance and then you see it suddenly opens, there's someone right next to it. Or if there are other boxes that are open nearby, that someone has been there and maybe are still there. And the grappling hook is just an amazing mobility tool and makes you feel almost like Spider-Man, which, I'll never complain about. And I loved her kit, and I had such a blast with her, and I love her design, and I love the cosmetics that are available for her so far. So yeah, easily she's my favorite. And when it comes to the zones, design-wise, they're all amazing too, right? Like, the layouts are great. Perimeter is this very open, yet it has a mix of open areas and kind of smaller claustrophobic areas. Dire Marsh is all open and Outpost is almost all tight corridors. Um, and it's so interesting how each feels different whether you're playing in a trio or solo. Perimeter is perfect for an all-rounder situation. If you're recuperating from a loss by yourself and want to go in and get some easy wins, go to Perimeter. If you're playing with some friends, Perimeter is a very easy bet. You can very treat it almost like a Rainbow Six Siege where you're checking and watching every corner. Um, Whereas Dire Marsh is really difficult in trios and duos. I've, Gambit, you and I, and even, the three of us as well, Dante, where we all tried to play this, in this atmosphere. And it was so tense, and we were always being watched. And every time we would look around, there would just be a sniper shot from somewhere, and we'd be down in seconds. Or the fog would come in, and we had no visibility. But when I played Dire Marsh solo, completely different experience. It is so it's almost like a very elaborate game of hide and seek. There have been entire runs of Dire Marsh where I haven't run into anybody, where I've just seen the aftermath of a fight and seen the bodies laying around. And there have been times where I'm only fighting UESC. So it's this very open section where you can easily hide and maneuver about, which I loved. Whereas Outpost is very easy and fun to coordinate if you're playing in trios, where you can work together, devise a plan of how you want to approach the pinwheel, if at all. But solo Outpost is a nightmare. It is one of the most... It's so unnerving and terrifying, and I was always on edge, and every time I felt like I was getting close to getting to a place where I was wrapping up, I would be shot by either a powerful UESC soldier or just some runner from nearby, and it was frustrating but exhilarating at the same time. At some point, I'm excited to figure out how to really approach Outpost solo, but yeah, so far the shells and the zones are really well designed, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the most recent and biggest zone thus far, which is Cryo Archive. We've alluded to it multiple times. For those who aren't familiar, Cryo Archive was added to the game as part of an ARG, or an augmented reality game, where outside of the game itself, people had to put together puzzles from within the game and work them out in real life to find their solutions and see what they all put together of like passwords and codes all through the Marathon Discord server. And it took a while for people to figure it out, and finally yesterday it opened. And I'm ashamed to say that I have not played Cryo Archive yet. As far as I know, Dante, you're in the same boat as me. Luis, you have. So we all have stuff to say about Cryo Archive, what we're looking forward to, maybe our issues with the structure and the requirements are so far, what we've enjoyed and what we're looking forward to. But I want to kickstart with you, Luis. What, as someone who has made a few runs into Cryo Archive, what are your overall thoughts of the experience?
If you thought Outpost was more terrifying, you haven't seen anything yet. Cryo Archive is genuinely one of the hardest maps to be added into a game. It doesn't hold your hand. You have to figure it out, and you have to go around a very much closed off area in the Marathon. Even though it's like small, it is very large. It is very tall. It's sprawling upwards because you see it's very vertical. That is the biggest thing about it. It's very much a vertical map that you have to climb to the top. It is a marathon to the top of the last vault. Of course, the requirements to get into each vault require to get a key, and those were done through special events in Dire Marsh called quarantines, which can drop a marathon map, or fighting wardens. I don't know if that's true, but for the most part, quarantines were the best bet. Lockdown events, sorry, not quarantines, lockdown events. And getting into Cryo Archive requires a loadout of 5k credits and Additionally, you have to be level 25 in order to get into the marathon itself. When it dropped, I almost thought my game was breaking, because right when the countdown finished, I was in the queue screen and like my audio just like bled. It literally started bleeding out and just phasing into the cinematic of the marathon, which completely cut to Durandal and his speech about the sword and the stone, and how humans are pretty much untrustworthy because they just colonize what they see. And for the most part, seeing that cinematic live was nothing short of amazing, and made what came ahead much more terrifying. Getting into it, you will be randomly placed into various sections of the map, either in biostock, cargo, or anywhere else. In order to progress into Cryo Archive, you have to find security keys. And for the most part, these security keys are what essentially is the modern equivalent of the boomer shooter trying to find a key to get to the other room. In this case, you have to find security keys in order to elevate your security clearance. Getting to security clearance 1 will let you progress into other rooms. Security clearance 2 opens up more areas. Security clearance 3, when you reach that, you will get an alert, and other players will also get the alert that someone has reached level 3. Getting to level 3 is the key to escaping Cryo Archive, as there are terminal rooms that will spawn the exfil point, because there are no visible exfil points after the 20-minute mark. And not only that, the final exfil is very much sound dependent. You have to pay attention where it spawns, and you have to get there in a certain amount of time. There is no in between. Getting out of Cryo Archive is really hard, because not only are you fighting hordes of UESC drones, because you have to fight the commanders in order to get more keys, on top of fighting terminals in order to elevate your security clearance, you also fight other players, and they get the advantage, and players are throwing in bubble shields in order to maintain and hold a point down. It is completely insane. Unfortunately, I have not successfully exfilled a run of Cryo Archive. I have died all 3 times, either because of missteps or because of ambushes. Furthermore, getting into a vault requires you finding batteries. Getting these batteries are spread throughout the Cryo Archive, and as you collect a number of those that are required to open the vault, you also need to bring along an empty container. That empty container is also a key item for the 7th final vault, which the team of Tyrax have managed to do last night and managed to beat the compiler in their 3rd attempt. There is not enough time to do this map. You have to run towards that point in order and get security clearances in order to fight the compiler. I did mention earlier that there is a complaint because of an RG of an item to drop in order to fight the compiler itself, but overall, Cryo Archive is the most terrifying map they've added in a game. It is very much a raid-like feature, and yes, while it is weekend only, you can see why. The casualty list is very high when running Cryo Archive. You will die. People will die in Cryo Archive, and they will have to lose everything they had. It is a major gamble, but it's a lot of reward alongside it, because there's going to be the best loot possible, because every team is bringing their best thing possible. So yes, even though it's a weekend event, it should remain that way, because it's very, very tense.
Yeah, from what I've seen of all the different footage of people attempting to climb that tower to get to the top and fight the compiler, it is super, super, super intense. And I looked on I looked on Twitter, and I got a post from Joe Ziegler. He's the game director, and he was saying that the reason that they had set it up that way so Cryo would only be available on the weekend would be, just having it so that people could build up those coffers again and try to go up, because it is so cutthroat. And if you go on the marathon Reddit, you'll see people that'll go and say, I lost, I had a haul of 60,000 credits that I was trying to bring back, and I couldn't find the exfil point, and I ended up dying. Or I've attempted to go into it, multiple times, and I've dropped, 20,000 credits in trying to get through and get something back, and I've died every time. So it is definitely not for the faint of heart. I think that Cryo is a very important part of Marathon, because it seems like it is very evocative of what is the thing that I feel is going to separate Marathon from a game like Arc Raiders, which is that this game wants to be cutthroat. It wants to be very aggressive. And Cryo is the personified, area of that sort of gameplay, where you aren't going to get your hand held. There aren't going to be very many places where you can catch your breath. It is going to be intimidating and very, very intense the entire time as you're there. And for hardcore players that have a dedicated squad that are going up, people who were doing, Destiny 2 raids, or they were, super hard inside of the Crucible, they would probably love something like this. They're going to love going through and doing Cryo Archive and the comp that also the competitive mode that also unlocked. But for most of the other players, it's going to be a very, very hard sell, because hearing what other people are saying and experiencing it yourself, if you do have those requirements of going into it, can be a very discouraging thing. And at the end of the day, I think it's mostly just going to be up to how players interpret that and how they handle that sort of very, very no handouts, no help kind of mentality that they're going to go into with this last area. And with that, I think it'll make a lot of people really, really love the game for what it is, but it might alienate a very few people, and that's going to sort of be the deciding factor of whether people see the community, and it'll make people love the game, it'll make some people hate the game. How do you feel about Cryo Archive, Saras? Do you think it's going to be a very divisive map for the fan base?
I think it is, but I think that is just fine. I think that this is an experience that is very much it is the final boss, so to speak, of this stage in Marathon. Obviously, there's going to be more zones and more shells down the line, but this is the ultimate thing to work towards. It is the first glimpse of the titular Marathon ship. And it will undoubtedly not be the last, because when you pick Cryo Archive, it is such a small part of that ship. There's so much more to explore. And what I really like about it is how it really harkens back to the original. It would have been so easy for them to try and do a reboot, but there are so many references to the original, whether it's with the terminals or the presence of Durandal, and also the final sort of raid boss of the area, which is the Svit compiler. It's also, it's fan servicey, but it feels right. It's that sort of fan service of like, oh wow, look at that classic enemy, oh gosh, now it's going to kill me, sort of balance, which I think is great. And I'm really excited to dive into it. I'm at level 24, so I'm almost there. I have to get beaten up at least once to really think that I understand this game for everything. But aesthetically, it looks great, and all the videos I've seen of the loot so far are so interesting. And the little contracts we get from Durandal himself, kind of talking to the runner. I am so excited to see where this story goes next and to see where it builds on. I think on that note, kind of getting into our final thoughts, um, what is kind of your overall opinion of marathon? Would you recommend it to people? Would you ask them to wait? And also, what is your biggest hope for the future of marathon as we move beyond season 1 and into the next few months and so on of support?
I it'll depend. I do want to recommend Marathon if you're brave enough to play the game and try it. It's of course never going to be for everyone. This is a very niche, and Bungie has made it out that it's very much targeting a certain audience, but at the same time you can find some good stuff out of it, and I would recommend people try it at least. If it's not there, if it's not for anyone, that's fine. I won't hold it against them. But for the most part, I do love how receptive the feedback is. Joe Siegler, as you mentioned before, Dante, has tweeted out about the complaints of Cryo Archive right while we were recording this, and is looking into each part on top of possibly adding solos into Cryo Archive, maybe? Who will know? But for the most part in the future, I am looking forward to Season 2 as they're adding in Night Marsh, which is going to be the night version of Dire Marsh. Because there's really isn't that many maps when it comes to extraction shooters. There's always going to be a daytime and a nighttime version. I hope we get a nighttime perimeter, just like how we saw in the tutorial. Maybe we could see some lockdowns because it's much more tense. But overall, I am looking forward to the new runner that they're adding. It seems like they're referencing the original runner from the reveal trailer in the graphic, and alongside the cradle. But if there's anything I would like to see, personally, I would like to see a much more in-depth customization system for the shells. Like, make them a little more personalized, but not like a lot, you know, like the shaders in Destiny, where each armor piece can be dyed to a specific shader. Like, have it like a little bit more personalized, but not a lot to, like, you know, discern the skins that are available, like how we saw in the original cinematic reveal trailer in the end, where we saw this assassin looking a little different than the one that we saw, like a little bit more orangey to discern like the one that we just saw. Like, having a little bit of customization with the colors of a shell would be a really good touch. Overall, is what I will look forward to.
There's something to be said about Bungie games, and that whether it's something like playing through the Halo games, Halo 1 through 3, Reach, ODST, or, you know, the sort of golden ages of Destiny and Destiny 2, there's always been a feeling that Bungie has this sort of, we'll call it sauce. I think Sarah said that earlier. There's a certain Bungie sauce to it, and it's been lost as time has gone on, especially with Destiny 2, and it's been kind of disappointing to see them lose sort of their vision, that thing that makes them so unique. It makes it separate. It makes a Bungie game separate from any other sort of shooter. And Marathon definitely feels like it has that sauce, in terms of just it having a very singular focus. It has a vision of what it wants to be. It isn't trying to appease itself. Obviously, it's making changes to make things easier and getting rid of sort of bugs and stuff like that. Obviously, it's not going to be that alienating. It's still going to listen to people's requests, but it's not trying to censor itself, and that is what I think makes a Bungie game feel different. And Marathon has that in spades. It feels nice to play. It looks amazing. There's such an intrinsic feeling of just wanting to keep going at it, whether it be the lore, you know, bringing you along, or just playing through and that dopamine hit you get whenever you finish off another runner, that it's going to draw in a lot of people who might have been very skeptical of it to start. They might see it and then think of it and go, oh, this is just another multiplayer shooter that's out there. Oh, we're going to get Concord 3 now or whatever. But there is something special with it, and I think that people should definitely give it a try. If you are familiar with games like Escape from Tarkov or something, I think that you could jump into Marathon no problem, especially if you're good with solos as well. You could definitely go into it. If you've played something like Arc Raiders, or even if you aren't really familiar with extraction shooters in general, it might be a little bit of a harder sell, especially because the game is very cutthroat and that can alienate a lot of people. But if you get a good group of friends together, ones that you've played games with, and you're looking for something to play, Marathon is an easy recommendation for a fun game with the boys, if you want to say. Saras, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much to say and kind of dive into. We live in a very interesting time in the industry where a lot of these multiplayer games, especially after Concord, are seen as having a timer. That this game is going to last a few weeks and that it's going to be short-lived. And since Marathon came out, it has felt like people really have an axe to grind with this game, whether because of the previous failures of the previous mistakes that Bungie made when it comes to Destiny and other things like that. But I went into this with a pretty open mind, and I've come away with it with one of my favorite multiplayer experiences of the past few years. It's not perfect, but Bungie is making additions. I really wanted a solo option in Cryo Archive because I think that kind of extreme challenge would be fun, and the fact that they're considering it is exciting to me. And yeah, I've adored this game, and it's not going to be for everyone, but I think you should give it a try. There's bound to be some free weekends down the line where you can try this game out, and I think that there's a lot that I want to see. I see more runners, more zones in the future, but it really boils down to this overall over-encompassing theme, which is that I want this game to last. I want this game to have an audience that sticks around, and even if it's not a constant 100,000 plus player base, as long as there is a dedicated few thousand that will always come back, always show up, which already there is. There's fan art, there is clips, people are streaming this game, people are talking about it, and there's something about it that has inspired a fandom that Concord or a High Guard could never achieve, and I think that is so amazing and a great success story in this current tumultuous time that we live in for the industry. So I am hopeful and somewhat confident that this game will last, and in a few years we'll be talking about all the new updates and everything that has changed since launch, hopefully for the better, and how this game has attracted so many people like it attracted me and the both of you. And on that note, I think that is going to end it for this review cast of Marathon. Let us know your thoughts of Marathon down below in the comments, what you think, if you've tried it for yourself. Stay tuned for more coverage of this game, and if you end up buying it for yourself, we'll see you on Tau City 4. Thank you.